Hello and welcome to Life in Focus with me, your host, Stephen Akinsanya. We've been off the air now for almost a year. A long time has passed. Many things have changed. But one thing that hasn't changed consistently is the rise of knife crime. In this first show, I want to reflect on what has happened, why we are still in the same position as we were the last time I aired this show. And as many of you know, I've been a knife crime campaigner for a number of years now, but still things seem to be becoming progressively worse. And I want to know why that is. We've got a new government in power. Just over a year now, Labour have the opportunity to undo and rebuild 13 years of neglect and dismantling by a Tory government. But the question is, can they do so? And if they can, how will they do it? You've got the rise of reform. Now, whilst my show is not a political show, we have to acknowledge that these are factors, perhaps, that one has to take into account with what is happening in our nation as regards youth violence and knife crime. So the rise of reform, people are increasingly becoming tired of career politicians or politicians who simply won't address the real issues of concern for people in their constituencies. They seem to think that they can take votes for granted. Now, I'm not saying that Reform or indeed their leader, Nigel Farage, has all the answers, but our mainstay political parties need to start listening. The Conservative Party have a new leader. I'm not sure for how long, but she too will have to start listening. How many Tory leaders have we seen since I was last on air? We also learn in the news that we as a nation do not have a fully equipped army, not enough soldiers to defend the nation were we to be attacked, insufficient numbers willing to join and to serve their country. And I ask the question, why? Is it the attitude towards war by the next generation, or is it something else, something completely different or unconnected? But here we are in 2025, approaching the summer, and we see recent figures revealed that there's been a 60% increase in young people carrying knives on school premises in the last 2 years. That's 12 blades on average per day being found in the classroom. We have 9-year-olds, when asked why they're carrying a knife to school, almost as if out of a movie, it's kill or be killed. How have we got here? How on earth have we got here? For all the inquiries, the commitments to change legislation, to increase sentencing for carrying knives, yet the figures would dictate that we are nowhere near solving this issue of knife crime. So in this first show, I don't have any guests this week. I just wanted to reflect and ask almost some rhetorical questions. But of course, for those of you who are watching, who are able to access the comment section, please feel free to comment on some of the things that I want to talk about. People have always carried knives, I've been told. There's nothing new here, nothing new under the sun. But I don't recall a level of knife-related offences, including murder, involving young people being at this level over the last 15 to 20 years. I do not remember seeing report after report on the news, and those are only the ones that we know about. I don't recall seeing reports of 14-year-olds and younger being murdered how is this possible? Is it the advent of digital and social media that informs us more of what is happening? And because it's always been a problem, we haven't really paid attention. Is it the rise of violence in society generally, which has desensitized young people to acts of violence and what they see on social media, and a willingness to carry and use knives with no apparent thought of the consequences? Now, many of us know that the issue of knife crime is particularly complex. There are socioeconomic factors where people live, the social demographic, young people carrying knives for protection because they fear being stabbed, those who carry knives for other nefarious reasons through criminal activity, wanting to protect their involvement in the drugs trade, those who readily carry a weapon, ready to use it in the need through an altercation that may or may not arise. It's a very complex issue. But there's a mindset also that pervades our society currently, and an attitude towards knives. And as a campaigner against knife crime, when I've looked at social media, I am troubled by the number of videos on Snapchat, on other social media platforms that young people have access to, where they readily see people posing with weapons, using weapons, glorifying weapons, some of the most horrific weapons that you can imagine. And I'm asking myself, what kind of mindset do we have in society amongst some of our young people? And I have to say some of our young people, because it's not every young person who is involved in this activity. Agreed, many of our young people know someone who is. And so there's the risk of them being on the cusp of involvement innocently, and just not understanding that their associations could land them before the criminal courts through the law of joint enterprise. And that's why it's so important that the education of young people must continue about knife crime, but tackling the wider issue of why it is our young people throughout this nation, up and down the country, young people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, carrying knives, prepared to use knives. Stabbings happening as far down as Devon and Cornwall, all the way up to Scotland. For some people who are perhaps quick to rush to judgment, well, for those of us who live in London, many people say, well, it's a black on black issue. It's got nothing to do with any other demographic. And I challenge people about that, because yes, there are many offences involving the use of knives by young black men. But equally, when one looks at the statistics and when one looks at the country as a whole, it is a social disease affecting every type of young person. And we would be wrong and foolhardy to just focus on one ethnic group and tarnish that group with being wholly responsible for what is a national problem. And that got me thinking about, well, is it, we say a national problem, is this happening in other parts of Europe? Is knife crime happening in France, Denmark, Sweden? I know they have their problems with youth violence. I recently watched a documentary about what was happening in Sweden, of all places. So is it something that's happening in the Western world? Is there something such as knife crime happening in the Asian continent or in Africa? And if not, why not? Is it the price we are paying for being a modern and liberal democracy? Is it that we as a nation have lost or no longer champion real community and family structure, which is something that you do see in these other cultures? Now, I don't claim to have all the answers, but I'm desperate to try and find solutions to the problem. But in trying to find solutions to the problem, we have to first perhaps identify the real issues behind why young people carry knives and continue to. Many of the talks that I give to young people across the capital predominantly focuses on prevention and diversion through education. Many of the young people I speak to are not habitual knife carriers, but the risk of them doing so is real. And what I find is that many of them have no concept beyond the carrying of the knife, what they might do with it, and as a consequence of what they might do with it, what might happen to them, and not just them, but their loved ones. What I term the ripple effect. No idea at all. So young people who think it's cool to carry a knife until the point when they have to use it and end up finding that the knife might be used against them. Young people laboring under a misapprehension that there is or there are safe places to stab someone around the body when there really is not. There's no safe place to stab anybody. The inability to settle disputes, trivial as they may be, without recourse to using a weapon. This misguided belief that certain parts of London belong to certain types of people, postcode wars, territorial wars, often by young people who have no financial commitment or investment in the areas where they claim to have possession. And arguments over predominantly areas where drugs are being sold and control of those territories. I get all of that. But I often wonder how many young people even contemplate life, not just life in prison, which is a potential result of carrying a knife and wounding someone fatally, but just life. Have we stooped to a level where young people just don't value their life or anybody else's? And if that's true, why? How much does urban culture play a role in the attitude and mindset of young people? And by that, I mean the glorification of carrying weapons. It's seen as something, a badge of honor, almost part of the uniform. The lack of community, family, discipline, direction, hope, aspiration, opportunity. Are these young people being failed? And who is responsible? Now, many people in society say, well, why should I be responsible for somebody else? And there's an argument to that. We're each responsible for ourselves. But does the community have a role in trying to safeguard collectively young people who are at risk of engaging in this behavior without knowing the full implications of doing so? Is it the product of what we call babies having babies? Many young people who are not equipped to be parents having children and not being able to raise those children when they themselves have not matured. Is that an element? Is that a factor? Now, I think back to when I was 9 or 10, and I do not remember any young person of that age carrying a knife to school. So I asked myself, why do we have under 10s carrying knives to school? Is it the environment that they are growing up in, the communities that they're growing up in? Do they feel so unsafe that they feel the need to carry a weapon to protect themselves in school, or to have beef with someone in the classroom and be ready to resort to carry out a stabbing on school premises? How on earth have we got there? So yes, it's complex, but the fact that it's complex means, or does not mean, that we do not strive to solve this issue. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that we can completely eradicate knife crime. I don't think we can. It's almost like saying we want to live in a society where nobody steals. Crime, criminal behavior is part of human behavior. I think I have to accept that. But what I'm not prepared to accept is that young people, at the number that we have, being put in the ground before they've even lived, that our society almost sees stabbings of young people, murders of young people, as just being part of the social fabric of a modern Britain. I can't accept that. So what are some of the other issues then that might lead to young people having this complete disregard for themselves and others? Now, I understand that the country is perhaps struggling economically, and that most of this will manifest in some form in youth violence. A lack of investment in certain sectors, lack of opportunity for employment in certain sectors, an economy that is flatlining rather than booming and growing. Not everybody can aspire to or want to go to university or to become a doctor or a lawyer. So what are we offering the young person who does not have those aspirations in terms of a future? Many young people I've spoken to say they do not see a future, and that's really worrying. They are already growing up in homes that are struggling to survive economically, to put food on the table, struggling to pay just their normal utility bills. And we know from examples that I myself have seen of young people taking to criminality just to support a parent in meeting those demands, those bills. But with that comes the risk of being stabbed or stabbing someone to protect that which you believe is yours. I have said for a long time that if you do not invest in people, you're setting yourself up for a problem. And that investment can be the criminal justice system, which we know is creaking under the pressure. That's the probation service, youth justice, those who are specifically skilled with the ability to deal with children who come from very challenging backgrounds predominantly. We don't invest in those services. What do we expect will happen? Just today, I read that the police are literally begging the government for more funding in order to police the streets. We already have people saying that Britain is lawless. It's a lawless UK. That's an image that's being portrayed. We have people literally walking into supermarkets and helping themselves and walking straight out. Staff being told, don't try and stop this person. It's not worth losing your life over, because what? They might be carrying a knife. And the person carrying that knife perhaps doesn't fear any repercussions for carrying that weapon and using it, whilst they walk out with their 6-pack of beer or load of meat or whatever it is they're taking. People doing something as basic as not even paying their fare on the trains. I saw this week that Robert Jenrick tried to act as a vigilante at a certain station, challenging people why they were not paying their fare. And of course, one person turned to him and said, what the F's it got to do with you? And if you're not careful, I'll juke you. I'll stab you. So this thing called knife crime seems to be weaving its way into the fabric of our society. And I wonder, through the lack of investment, how we're really going to deal with this. I mentioned earlier on about the country's inability to recruit young people to join the armed forces. And some may say, well, why is that relevant? Well, it all comes back to the same thing of a lack of investment. People crying out for young people to learn some form of discipline, some form of structure, all of those things that the army does give you. But why is a young person going to want to join the army when there's no real investment? And even worse, when you leave the army, there are so many veterans who are not looked after. Many of them sleeping homeless on our very streets in the capital. So we are in a real bind here. Just today, I saw on the news or heard the audio of a police officer apprehending a 15-year-old who, it was discovered after searching him, had a knife in his waistband, and an officer perhaps went over the top in the way that he dealt with him. And the officer ends up being sacked for not showing enough respect to a 15-year-old. Now, I'm all for the police acting reasonably, appropriately, but what message are we sending out? But when a young person is challenged, having been found with a weapon, that the softly approach, even in the moment of heightened risk and adrenaline flowing, it results in an officer losing his job. The ripple effect of that is there'll be less people willing to serve as police officers, less police officers on the street, more people in our communities feeling unsafe, more young people feeling that they need to carry a knife in order to protect themselves because no one else will. And so the spiral continues. You've got to invest in people. Where are the training contracts for those who are not in education and training? Where are the real job opportunities? Many young people I know now talk about just wanting to leave the UK, go and live somewhere else. Because even those young people say that the climate for progression for a young person is becoming increasingly difficult. You can't even afford to live independently in London as a young person unless you're on a very good salary, or you have supportive parents, or you've managed to save a lot of money towards a deposit. Many young people are living with a parent or parents well into their 20s, some into their 30s and even 40s. All of these things feed into a psyche of where is the progress? What does the future hold for me? Many young people walking around who are angry because they don't see opportunities, angry because they don't see a way forward. Many groups, organizations doing sterling work to try and divert young people away from criminal activity, away from carrying knives. But often I'm told, well, I'm doing our best to do that, to divert young people away. But where we're really struggling is offering them a viable alternative. If you say to a young person, look, don't do that, do this, but this needs to be something which is tangible, which is possible. So really, we can talk about all the stats that we have considered over the last 5 years, all the various reports, new proposed and actual legislation in relation to certain types of weapons being sold. We can talk about increased punishments. But is that really going to solve the issue of knife crime? Just yesterday, I read that 2 14-year-olds had been arrested because they were actually selling zombie knives. They were ordering them online and then selling them on. They saw an opportunity to make some money. Many young people do not understand the ripple effect of knife crime. And I speak about this in many of the addresses that I give. It's not just the moment of stabbing somebody. I even struggle to think how a young person takes a life and literally can go home and go to sleep and not think about it. That in itself is shocking. And maybe they do think about it, but they're able just to somehow process it and move on. What does that say about our society? What does that say about our tolerance or attitude towards youth violence? But they don't contemplate ever being caught. They don't contemplate the punishment and those who are affected by the punishment they receive. Because everyone's connected to someone. I listened to an interview today about a young man who was involved in youth violence and ended up serving a considerable period of time in prison. And he said the very people who he used to run with, committing his offences, not one of them came to see him in prison during the time he was serving his sentence. And many young people don't understand that the friends that you have at the time when you're engaged in the activity you're engaged in are not the same friends who will stand by you through the 8 years or more that you're serving in that particular case. Could be longer. The things that you become engaged in and fight about are often forgotten. Your supposed enemies have moved on. Even something as simple as a relationship that you have with a loved one that you cherish. It might not be your mother or father. It might be an aunt or an uncle or a grandmother. That opportunity to spend valuable time with them is gone. Or it might be things that you've always wanted to do that you never got to do. I often think about many of the murder cases I've been involved in. When I see the deceased, a young life taken, never having taken a driving lesson, never having gone abroad on holiday or gone to a nice restaurant, or just experiencing some of the things that we take for granted. They will never experience it, let alone the bigger tickets, such as having a family, becoming a father. Life extinct, gone, and often for what? So as I say, the volume of young people losing their lives is completely unacceptable, because when you engage with many of these youngsters who are the perpetrators, they themselves have no real concept of time, the implications of what they've done, and how it has not only affected that person who they've inflicted that harm to and their loved ones, but their own family, their own loved ones. They have absolutely no concept. They have no concept of this thing called joint enterprise, or joint participation, as the law now calls it. Young people being literally in the wrong place at the wrong time. I've spoken to many mothers begging for help because their sons serving sentences when they were not even the principal defendant, i.e. they were not the person who inflicted the stab wound, they were not carrying a knife, but they were there. And the law says that if you're deemed to have actively encouraged or participated in some way, then you're at risk. And so there are many young people serving very long sentences because of the law of joint enterprise. Might even be because of appearing in a video where someone's recorded something and someone said something about reprisal or revenge, and that's deemed to be pre-planning for an attack on another rival group. Young people have no concept of these things, and how something that on the face of it may appear innocent could land you behind bars, and even worse still, for a very long time for something you just had no involvement in. And trying to undo that is very, very difficult. So when we think about how we're going to solve this issue, who do we look to? Do we look to Our politicians, well, they can't have the answer for everything. It's not their children. Do we look to the parents? Now, these are all questions I'm putting out there because, as I say, I don't have all the answers. I know what I do. I know what I'm able to contribute to this very serious issue, but we've got to ask some really hard questions. Yes, the government has a responsibility to protect its citizens, but surely there is a responsibility incumbent on parents of children. Parents need to be mindful of what their children are doing despite the pressures of life, because children are their priority. I've called for a long time for there to be an education, as one of our viewers says. The youth need to be educated in the law. That can bring some kind of fear of the consequences. And I'm still amazed at the number of young people who still don't understand that carrying a knife can obviously land you before a court. There should be uniformity in sentencing, because some sentences pass for a first offence, and there's no uniformity. Different sentences are passed on for different individuals depending on the circumstances of the case. But perhaps there needs to be more severe sentencing for carrying knives as a deterrent, as a starting point. Why is it wrong that there should be an element of fear? There are some schools that say, oh, young people should not feel scared, but it might be necessary for young people to feel scared. These are the consequences if you're caught carrying a knife. These are the consequences if you're caught stabbing people. Whilst we address all the other issues, there has to be some form of deterrent. Now, the government can do what it needs to do in terms of legislation, but the problems go much deeper than, as I say, government. Community. Some people say, well, what's community? Well, we seem to have lost that sense of community. So it might not be that. Because you can only have community, I suppose, when people feel that they are part of a community. But when I look around, people seem to be quite disparate, doing their own thing, living perhaps in enclaves. I do worry about the UK, Edson. I really do worry. Because if we don't have people who are ready to step up and take the hard decisions and make the right investments in the right areas at the right time, then we are rapidly heading towards disaster. And I know it sounds dramatic, but I said this 5 years ago. I predicted that we would be here 5 years ago. I said, if we do not invest in youngsters, if we do not invest in our services, if we do not create opportunity as a viable alternative to what young people are being attracted to through social media of fast living, making money, quick money, doing all these things that we see, then this is what's going to happen. I said it. Yes, needs to be an element of fear, but more importantly, young people need to feel that there is a hope. Harsher sentencing, yes, to an extent, but we only need to look at the American model to know that passing severe sentences is not necessarily the answer, because the Americans give out some ridiculous sentencing for the most dangerous criminals, but yet murders happen every day in America. It hasn't stopped people committing crime. I think prevention is more powerful, and that's why education of those yet to be involved in criminal offending is vital. Because if we have 9 and 10-year-olds who are arming themselves, what do they know about the law? A 9-year-old is not even criminally responsible. You have to be 10. So if we've got 9-year-olds carrying weapons, ready to use them without even knowing where the vital organs are in the body at 9, without even knowing about life sentences, without even knowing the ripple effect of their actions, then that's why prevention is extremely important. We need to get into the schools. And I remember when I started this journey many years ago, I wanted to get into all the local schools where I live to speak about knife crime, to share my videos, to talk about some of my cases. And the local council, complete apathy, not really interested. And this is the same council where sadly a young girl lost her life intervening in a dispute between her friend and somebody else who happened to have a knife. So prevention is extremely important. And that's part of the frustration, that with all the great work being done by so many groups I could mention, knife crime continues to rise. And I happen to think that the reason why that is because we are not investing enough resources in, first of all, the prevention side and opportunities for youngsters. If we look at ourselves as a nation right now, we're a service-based industry. And many of you watching the news will see through the state of the economy, what do we create here? What do we build? What do we make? What are we known for? Most of our industry is depleted. I tell young people regularly that the way out is to be a wealth creator, to be an innovator, to have a trade or a skill with your hands. Those things should not be frowned on. But we need to offer viable alternatives to our young people. Because if you switch on YouTube, or maybe not YouTube, but if you switch on Snapchat or Insta, and you see young people posing with wads of money through their nefarious dealings of running a county line, or drug dealing, or whatever they're doing to make money, and all the material trappings, that's appealing to many young people who do not see a way out. They don't see a progression. They don't see a future. So you're having to challenge that. But what are you challenging it with? We adults are making decisions not based on the next generation, but what suits us in the current. But really, we're missing a trick. We should be all our planning here should be with one eye on the future for the next generation to come, preparing the way for them. And that means places for them to live, affordability, opportunity, entrepreneurship, pioneers, tech-savvy young people, giving them the environment to thrive. Because if we don't, this is what we will see. Young people taking risks. And with the risk is the consequence. Consequences which they have no contemplation of, because they're still children. So to my mind, we need to invest in people. And I say, well, how do we do that? Well, make the citizens of your country a priority. It's as simple as that. Make the citizens of our country a priority, and with an emphasis on young people. Build young people, builds a stronger nation, builds a nation which has economic clout, can take its standing in the world environment. It's a place where people want to come and invest. The French have a saying, l'argent paie l'argent. Money makes money. But if young people are not being given the opportunities to thrive, and I speak to a lot of them, they don't see hope. They don't see a future. They can't even afford to live in the areas where they've grown up. And it all might sound trite to many people, but I'm telling you, this is the reality. Unless we are prepared to offer young people viable alternatives for a future, knife crime will continue, because associated with knife crime, often drugs, because drugs is still a lucrative business. And as a lucrative business, it needs protecting. And it needs protecting, and it usually involves a weapon. And it usually results in someone losing their life. How many young people are now sitting in prison, serving ridiculously long sentences through a moment of madness with a knife, because it involved some activity involving drugs or some criminality or some beef over drugs? How many? Now, for some, it's an entrenched lifestyle. They've embraced it and they're prepared to take the consequences. I guess my address is not for them. I can only hope and continue to pray for them that at some point in their lives, they'll wake up and realize that they've wasted their life. But I'm really interested in the youngsters coming behind. That's the sort of age group of even young as 7, 8, 9, up to 15. Those who are on the periphery, those who need to be diverted away from this lifestyle because it's going to rob them of their life in more ways than one. Those are the young people that I am so keen to reach and to target, to say there's a better way. These are the implications, or these are the results rather of what happens when you make the wrong choices. Now, I don't blame our government wholly, the current government, but what I'm saying is that there needs to be a level of serious commitment. We can worry about things like pollution. We can worry about things like congestion in our major cities, but more important than any of that is the safety and welfare of our children. Where are we going to target that investment? Are we going to target it in things that sound politically good to do, or in the realities of what is afflicting many young people? How many more debates are we going to have? How many more conversations are we going to have about knife crime? I'm quite frankly sick of it, but I'm committed to reaching young people, trying to steer them on a course of liberty and fulfillment of life, achieving the real calling and not ending up in a cemetery or behind bars. One thing that I have learned when I talk about investment is that as a parent, your greatest investment is in your children. And that investment might not always be financial, it might be with your time and your energy, presenting them with new experiences beyond that which they're normally used to, spending time with them away from the madness, giving them viable alternatives or exposures to different ways of living, different experiences, and validating them. That is a really important aspect of parenting. Because at the end of the day, children want to be validated. They want someone to tell them that they're safe. They want someone to tell them what they're capable of, how great they can be. But not just telling them, but exposing them to things. You know, as a mentor, I've done some amazing things with young people that have opened their eyes, whether it was a trip to the Royal Albert Hall for a young man who wants to be a composer, who'd never sat in a venue like that to listen to fine musicians playing music, or to a guy who has an interest in cars and taking him to Silverstone to watch the Formula One race cars. Just watching his face light up at the possibilities of what he could achieve. Life is made up of experiences, but it's then what experiences do you want to have? The negative ones or the positive ones? So, as I draw to a close in this very first show of 2025, as I say, I've been off the air for a while now, but I decided to come back because there's still work to be done. In the coming weeks, I'm going to be speaking to people in the community, people doing great things, people working with children, people who've turned their lives around from lives of crime to doing viable things for themselves, viable alternatives, creating new opportunities for themselves. I'm going to be speaking to people like that, and also speaking to some of my guests that I had on last year to ask this question: why are we still here? Why is knife crime still rising in the UK in 2025? Supposedly a modern democracy with the sixth or seventh largest economy in the world, apparently. Why are we here? And what are we going to do to fix it? Because we have to fix it if we're to give the next generation a real opportunity to thrive and not be some basket case where young people in their droves just want to leave. And I know many of them who just want to leave. I certainly did not envisage that for my children as a young boy myself growing up in Croydon. But I can see it. I can understand it. So that's my opening show. Just some reflections, some sober reflections. Is there a way forward? I believe there is, but it's going to take commitment from all sides, commitment from politicians, commitment from parents, commitment from communities, commitment from people like me, commitment from youth groups, social workers, because it's not about us. It's about the generation who will follow us. Because as I always say, our time on the stage is limited. I want to thank you for watching. My name is Stephen Akinsanya. I'm a barrister at 15 Newbridge Street Chambers in London. You've been watching Life in Focus, and I will see you next time. God bless. Thank you very much.